Welcome to the Stanford MBA Two-Generational Wisdom Bridge across 30 years. I'm your host, Catherine Keogh McLennan from the MBA Class of 1995 of Stanford. In each episode, I bring together one of my classmates, now in our 60s, give or take, and a member of the class of 2025, now in their 30s, give or take, and about to graduate into an entirely different world than we graduated in 1995. Back then, we finished our MBAs just as the internet was emerging. Today's grads are stepping into a future shaped by artificial intelligence, uncertainty, and we hope that we express possibility. These conversations bridge generations, share lessons, and spark reflections on leadership, life, and what's next. Let's dive in. Today, I'm joined by David Farlow from the Stanford MBA Class of 1995, one of my classmates, and Khalid Alajlan from the class of 2025. David is a transformational leader whose David is a transformation leader whose career spans global banking, fintech, and operational turnarounds across Europe and the United States. From senior roles at Capital One and Wells Fargo to leading large-scale transformations in fintechs and UK utilities, he brings deep expertise in productivity, regulation, and customer experience. These days, he splits his time between London and rural Ireland, working remotely from a village that boasts neither a pub nor a post office, but he assures us has both a chapel and a chocolate factory. Khalid is a second-year MBA student at Stanford GSB, Graduate School of Business, and one of the lead organizers of the recent student trek to Saudi Arabia. A former product manager in the satellite tech sector, he's passionate about how technology, a former product manager in the satellite tech sector, he's passionate about how technology bridges people and potential. He grew up in the UK and now plans to return home to Riyadh, drawn by the energy and opportunity of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 transformation. In this episode, David and Khalid reflect on the evolution of global technology, David tracing a path from Mosaic to AI chatbots, and Khalid describing the rise of a startup culture in the Gulf. They discuss intergenerational shifts in leadership, education, and innovation, and what it means to bring wisdom, curiosity, and creativity to building the next economy, whether from a farm in Kerry or a high-rise in Riyadh. So Khalid, where are you? You don't look like the typical Stanford setting. You've got actually dishes behind you. So where do we find you today?
So I live off campus this year, and I'm in Barron Park, which is close to Mountain View.
And what are you up to today? Today is Monday, I think, in your time.
Yeah, I just finished class, and during the lunch break, I hung out with some friends. A lot of people visiting campus this weekend because of reunions. So I had to catch up with a few people and went back home.
David, where do we find you tonight, I think?
Tonight you find me in a far corner of Europe. I'm in the rural part of Ireland in the far southwest in County Kerry. I live close to a small village. There's no pub, there's no post office, but there is a chapel and a chocolate factory. So, those are the two needs in life met, really, I think. My wife and I thought we'd like somewhere green to get away from London. And we thought we'd spend a third of our time here, long summer holidays. We have a daughter at school, never else. But, 4 years later and 95% of our time later, we've realized that we can work remotely from the ideals of the countryside and only return to London for great sushi, great coffee, and good theatre.
And what's it like? Which one do you enjoy, London or living the life in the country?
Each has their own. Well, the country is, it's beautiful, it's green, it's healthy, the air is clean, it's beautiful, you can see the horizon, the big city has the good coffee, the good sushi, the occasional business meeting.
Khalid, you are second year, almost finished, and the proverbial question that everybody detests, because I still remember it 30 years ago, is, so what are you doing when you graduate? Is that a bad question or is that a good question?
And it depends where you're at, honestly. For me, the answer that I've been giving people, which is I'm still figuring it out, but most probably going back to Saudi Arabia, which is my home country. And I don't want to rush the decision. When I go back, I'm gonna look at things there and see how it goes.
Khalid, you are famous, I think, because were you the one that organized the trip for the business school students? It would have been this year, yes, to Saudi Arabia?
It was December. Yes, I was one of the four leading organizers for that trip. I didn't know I was that famous, but I'm glad it's reached, and I hope it's spotted.
People were so appreciative. What was it that you showed the students that was important for you guys to show them in Saudi Arabia?
Well, for me personally, I think it's because of the distance, because not a lot of people have been there. Tourism hasn't opened until like 7, 8 years ago, and not a lot of people have been there. So it was good for people to see themselves how the country is growing, the beauty of the country, the diversity of the country. Like we went to Jeddah, which is a coastal city at the Red Sea. We went to Al Ula, which is a historical place that is more than 3,000 years old. We went to Riyadh, which is the capital city, which is the business vibe. It's like a London, New York, all that.
And when you go back, would you live in the capital like David, or do you find a country retreat in Saudi Arabia, or the best of both?
I think I'm a little bit of a city person. I love Riyadh, and my family is in Riyadh. I used to work in telecom before, and I'm leaning toward the tech sector in general. I love tech. I've loved tech ever since I was a young kid. I grew up in the UK, and I appreciated tech and how it made me reach family back home with calls or at the time messengers and all that. So this is me.
One of the things that we talk with our class is about the fact that we emerged into the very beginning of like internet, or at least the retail, everyone internet. I'm in awe of you guys, Khalid, for the exposure you guys have of such a different world. I don't know, David, how are you seeing the new world emerging, both from the eyes of London and from the eyes of Ireland? Anything you're seeing?
I reflect often on the journey of internet and AI and big data and so on. So I remember being in the computer lab going, gosh, why do I want to see Washington State's, budget on Mosaic? I didn't really get it. 3 years later, I leave consulting and somebody says, oh, you should go interview at, to do strategy at eBay. And I go, eBay is just like one of 6 internet auction companies. I'm not best at getting the whole internet, but then as you watch, I mean, there's interesting dynamics. One is the people who make the money at the beginning tend to be the infrastructure people. It's kind of like Cisco was really big when we left, and Cisco was doing the writing, and then it goes on to this kind of the software providers, and then it gets on to the application bit. And you see that a little bit at the minute because it's NVIDIA who's making all. It's like, hey, they're the NVIDIA. But I think that if we're to pass on an observation to people at school at the minute, is the importance of understanding how things work. So if I give an example, I've done some work in ag tech. I've done a couple of times over the years. I've looked for profitable ag tech opportunities. One for a farming publisher that wanted to use its data. Like, we got data. How do we sell the data, and how do we get into it? And then once for a provider of agricultural labor, which had a leading software company. But it's like each time you go, this makes the world better. Ag tech makes the world better. A lot of money went into it because it's like big data and feed the world, and there's 1 billion people and the big themes. But the snag is the people who came in the first wave was often bright Harvard, Stanford MBAs and say, this is the way the world should work. And the farmers sat there and went, that's not the way our world works. You're not solving our problem. That sounds really cool, but you're not solving our problem. There's this danger of one thinks about, especially MBAs are guilty, and I probably was too, the world should work this way, rather than going, solve my problem for me. And that's that. There's a lot of danger in kind of like, oof. It's, how do you? But that requires you to have good knowledge of the market you're trying to help. And that in some ways goes to AI, because people go, I'm working in fintech at the minute, and my firm is a bright young group of AI programmers who go like, yeah, we can get a chatbot to answer all the questions. And you're going, no, you're not. Because it's like, we just change out all the old chats, and you're like, okay, it's generative AI. It can throw up anything. You don't really understand it. The thing is, the way it will work really well is it will present what they think it should say to the person who's doing the chat. And they will, 80% of the time be right. They'll say, great, tick, right. And then we'll train the AI better that way, and it'll get better and better over time. But AI is like a puppy you need to train. And you don't see people trying to do the training particularly well. They just think, I can get to the answer and just kind of miraculously just do everything for me. So it gets into, and I don't see how this plays out, because obviously the big companies have all the data. But how do you make money, or how do you get solutions, something you can sell where you've trained something for other people's benefit? So you can see how it helps people. Because one of the most powerful phases I think I've seen over the years is taking the robot out of the human. We all use AI to help make ourselves more productive, but I can't see it replacing us yet. Even though it says it's going to get more and more intelligent, you're like, it might do, but it's still throwing out responses and not getting what we want. And I still see the judgment and the value of what is doing. So that's a very quick run through of internet through big data, and the little dead end that, well, it's a dead end, but the current slow lane of blockchain, that was going to change the world so many times.
Oh, yes. But blockchain became crypto, right?
Well, that's one route, but people are going, but it's going to be great for contracts, because you can always see what the chain is, but it's just so inefficient with energy. And then that's the other thing is, in Ireland, data centers use up 17% of our national energy.
17%.
17% electricity generator either. So it's kind of, the AI is like, what's your carbon footprint? It's sort of, you're hinting at it, but it's like, there's a world where it's kind of almost free to do all these AI searches, and they're a lot better, but there's we live in an interesting time.
So, Khalid, what is it about Saudi Arabia that's calling you back?
So what calls me back, I feel like there is a window of opportunity that is really promising, and being a part of the change that's happening there. I believe that there is no single country that has this amount of growth in that short of period right now at this moment. China was in the past, a lot of countries were in the past, but I believe the Middle East and specifically Saudi Arabia are doing a transformational journey, and I want to be a part of it. I've seen like a lot of changes. I've seen a lot of things. Before going into Stanford, I've worked a little bit and I've seen some of those things, but I feel like there's a lot more room to do that. And it's encouraging seeing a lot of, like, I think 50% of the Saudi population is less than 35 years. So that energy, that eagerness to change, that eagerness to grow. And also we have been catching up with a lot of things, and there's just excitement, energy, room to grow that in the past I thought I looked at the Silicon Valley in a similar vein, but the Silicon Valley is leading there. But Saudi Arabia is trying to catch up and reach that point.
That's what my instincts and a little bit of my reading hears. And it almost reminds me, David, of what decade was that? The Irish Tigers. What was that? That was probably
back in the early 2000s when we blew up. We thought we'd conquered the world and overinvested in real estate, and then crashed heavily. We had a huge real estate boom, and everyone borrowed money, and we ended up with overbuilding, and we owed several 100% of GDP, and we bailed the banks out much more than anyone else. It's a real scar on the country.
But the technology that you guys attracted because of various tax regimes.
That was the whole offering low corporation tax, because also we had a very well educated workforce, often that emigrated. Plus, we had good golf courses. The Americans had that too.
Let's get good golf courses.
Oh, don't underestimate the power of the golf course.
Back to the infrastructure of Ireland and what attracted to people. Khalid, are you also hear that your education levels are fantastic? What is it about Saudi Arabia? I don't know if it's the economics, the government, the education, the social. What is the perfect mix that's happening right now that's allowing you guys to be where you are?
I think the perfect mix is having a clear idea where we want to go. So in 2015, 2016, we launched Vision 2030. And at that time, it was something that is new, something that is different, something that I think a lot of people didn't imagine would happen on ground. And I think that was changed quickly. And like, if you ask any person right now, they would say, we want to do more even, we want to reach more. And if you look at the metrics we have seen, some of them fell short, but a lot of them either met or exceeded. And I still believe there's a lot of room to grow there. So having a clear vision and strategy to go somewhere that the whole country is aligned to, as well as having many sectors to develop. Like I mentioned, the tourism sector hasn't started till 2018, so there's a lot of room to grow there. The sports industry also is another sport. So you can name many sectors that have that potential. And there are some sectors that are developed, such as the energy sector, the petrochemicals, that we want to diversify from to gain more.
It'd be interesting to watch your diversification. Australia, where I am, has always been the lucky country because of our resources. And we are almost the least diversified country that still has the wealth per GDP. So diversification to a strategy. What makes the strategy so well known? Are the youth of your country understanding that strategy?
I think the good thing is there's a good alignment, which wasn't present in the past. So that alignment makes the government, different ministries really work together on common goals. And at the same time, it's communicated really well across levels and understood. And the youth is trying to work for it, but trying to find also opportunities. So I was lucky to work at a startup in the summer, and I've never imagined myself working at a startup in Saudi. If you asked me like 10 years ago, but that like the entrepreneurship scene is there to find the gaps to reach that vision or to reach that target. And there's the government part, which is the different ministries working into common goals and working together.
Yeah, and I go back almost to the US, gosh, I think it was the 1950s when one of the big institutions, DARPA, actually were the seed to the Silicon Valley, and how important government is to get those startups going, but the right environment.
But Catherine, I think we have, and Khalid, you'll have a great perspective on this. From my understanding, Saudi is more like Singapore and China in being government led. Our governments are short term, resource poor, overpromised, not used to, well, the UK and Ireland are both very bad, but everything is always bad. We just love, our papers just love to go like the world is falling apart. Even though we're richer, we're better off, we're healthier, just everything's bad. Whereas when you're in a fast growth economy, whether it be, dare I say, somewhere like Florida or Saudi, there's that positive view of there's growth, we're growing, it's lifting, and having a government that's a 2030 vision and going forward is a very different world where the capital is being deployed by the government and directed, and probably, as with Singapore, hiring the brightest and the best to help lead that. And it's a common effort. So, but you live it. So you tell us more about what you think makes it successful, because it's very different from the US and the UK.
So the way I look at it, it's like this, similar to the dilemma between private and public companies, where there's this notion that public companies focus from quarter to quarter. And if you look at it at a government level, it may be like election to election sort of point of view, or to mid-elections. And whereas private company, you have the leverage of thinking long term, thinking about where you want to be 10 years later or 15 years later. And I think this really helps in growing the country, not being short-sighted and thinking about long-term goals. And maybe sometimes you need to sacrifice the short term to grow further in the long term. So I think that this is the way I look at it. It's similar to the dilemma between private and public companies. Why not stay in the US versus Saudi? And this is a question that I thought about during the last 2 years. And I think what makes Saudi really attractive is I feel like there's more impact that I can do there. And if I'm going to look at it from the US perspective, if I want to stay in the US, I want to stay a shorter term to learn something different that I'm not going to experience in the future, and then move back to Saudi. So either way, there is like the moving back part will be within either 0 to 2 years. And I think I've chosen to go back and because I want to capture the opportunity as soon as possible.
And it's almost like, dare I say, the prodigal son returning. Don't know if you have that fable in your culture, but we have a fable of the prodigal son returning after he's been on adventures, or even Ulysses, or the return of the hero. So, David, you, as I recall, remind me, you went back to the UK.
I went back after 3 years. I came back again. I went back after 10 again. I've been back and forth.
So one of the views you said, watch for the Stanford, Harvard type of view when you return home. And I'm just imagining the farmers and ag tech that you're with. Do you remember what you felt like?
Harvard has the brand. Stanford, and get people to go, oh, that's nice. But there was an interesting dynamic in the States, because I obviously worked in the States for a long time. There was a curiosity. People go like, oh, you went to Stanford. You'll have bright ideas. Come chat to me. There was a hunger. It's kind of like, yeah, you'll have interesting things to say and you'll have interesting conversations. In the UK, it was less like that for whatever reason. It was less like, oh, you've been there. There's a entrepreneurial spirit in the US that's a little bit more open to learn, I think, that I kind of find.
And Khalid, that's what you're describing. It's that hunger to learn by this youth population. So is there, when you think about education and you think about your choice to go to Stanford, tell us a little bit about how that came about.
So funny enough, I've had the idea of doing an MBA after electrical engineering. So I did electrical engineering in undergrad, and I have this idea since high school, which was pretty early because I didn't want to be super technical. I wanted to be somewhere in the middle between technical and business. And during high school, I thought about, since I grew up in the UK, my English was quite good and all that. So should I move to the US for undergrad or should I wait until the MBA? And I made that decision after like consulting my father to go for an MBA and try and apply to a top school. Going to Stanford specifically is for some reasons. One of them is I've never been to the West Coast and I want to see the West Coast and the beautiful weather here. Another reason is the alumni network, which is in Saudi and also outside of Saudi. But specifically for me in Saudi, the alumni network made a huge decision. It is so close together, uptight. I see a lot of them as mentors, as people that I aspire to be like, and it has a different aura. As David mentioned, it's not as famous as Harvard, I believe, in the whole MENA region, but it has the people that I want them to know about Stanford will know about Stanford. And this is the distinction I made when I made the decision.
Are you guys seeing the rise of a particular area that's the Silicon Valley of Saudi?
I'm not sure about that. There is a tendency to try and create a similar environment, but I believe replicating it would be quite tough. It would, if I were the person to make that decision, I would go for it another way, but with a similar values and structures. Because Silicon Valley, I feel like there's only one Silicon Valley, and like no matter how many times you try and replicate it, it might be something that is unattainable or unachievable. But if you get close to it, if you get it on your different way that is aligned with the culture, aligned with the narrative in the region, that is, for example, if you have multiple cities, you can do mini Silicon Valleys in a way. If you start from ground zero, which is like with different projects, you can maybe replicate some of that, but on a different style. And we're in a new, different age. I believe Silicon Valley was there in the internet era, where, as I mentioned, we're in the AI era. So it's maybe similarities, but overall, there will be huge differences.
So, Khalid, you mentioned an interesting thing I wanted to explore around culture. If I just tell the background, when we were at the GSB, it claimed to be very international because 40% of the people were international, but most international folks had actually been to high school in the States, including myself even for a brief while. And then it's very international because we had one international case study in each of our classes.
Are you kidding?
Yeah, there's always like, but this is the international case, yay! And then we had the global management program, but basically that was the professors wanted people to work harder, so you had to take 108 credits to the GMP was basically the main requirement. That's what I remember anyway of it. So, but when one's working in different cultures, and I've worked in Eastern Europe and India and other places, and you go like, Stanford did not prepare you for this.
No.
Has Stanford got any better? Because obviously you work in a very different culture in Saudi. People's way of communicating, English may be spoken. People have different expectations. There's different ways and speed that things move at, and how people signal things, and in the language. Has Stanford kind of got a bit more international or not, or is it still faced with being very US centric?
So I believe it's still US centric, but from what you said to me, I see some improvements. There are more like case studies on international, but I don't feel there are enough. Classes that are international, there are some classes that are international related. I think the majority of them, if not all, are taught by people from the US or that have US focus that look at it from the lens of the US. So I feel like there's a lot of room to improve. There have been like global study trips, which has been a good addition. I'm not sure they were there back then or not, but I feel like those really show you how countries are. For example, I went to Vietnam and Singapore, and I've never been to East Asia, and I've seen how things are on the ground. As you mentioned, this is something that is not taught in classrooms. It's taught in experiences and like you being on the ground. Hopefully, like there will be more. One of the reasons that we did this trek to Saudi was this reason. It's like we wanted people to see how it's different and how it is out there, rather than just looking at it from I don't know how many miles away. So there's still room for improvement if I'm going to answer that question.
Talking to the 25 of you guys so far is maybe as a result of your generation and the internet and the education, but the travel as well. David, you might have gone to Eastern Europe, but that was a far notion. 1989 is when the wall came down in Berlin. But one of your classmates said, yeah, no, I'm going to go to Kazakhstan next. Do you guys want to attract the type of people that you're meeting at Stanford or other technologists into Saudi? Is there encouragement to get those people over in immigration?
I believe so. There's a huge expat community in Saudi already, but like the high caliber, talented, I mean, who wouldn't want those people to work in their country and improve it? And at the same time, I believe it will develop the country, especially when you're at a time of a change in a high pace environment. I think it would add value. We have been like to multiple places when we did, for example, the trek, and this is Saudi specific. It's like there is an appetite to have more people. Like there are a lot of people, for example, like the Red Sea global company in Saudi, which is like the Maldives of Saudi on the Red Sea. The CEO is an expat. So you can see that in many things. And also the Diriyah, which is the CEO is a US, Jerry Anzillo, and like it's a heritage historical place, but it brings the experience and understands the culture and the nature of Saudi to kind of bridge both gaps.
I'm already sitting here getting excited for your country because I was remembering as we left Stanford and the wall came down and the Eastern Europe opened up, Israel and Berlin became quite the at least mini Silicon Valleys. David, have you been to Saudi Arabia?
I have not. I've been to some of the other Emirates, but not to Saudi itself.
Well, if you ever go there, let me know. I'd be happy to show you around.
That's the power of the Stanford connection, Khalid, you'll find over 30 years. I'm, again, excited for you about the network you have in Saudi, but the network you have globally. David, what struck you about that alumni network and how it's played over the last 30 years?
People are friendly. It opens doors to have interesting conversations. But if I just chip my shoulder about Harvard, wherever you go, there's like 10 times more Harvard people. I think in our year, there ended up being more Harvard people come to the Bay Area than the Stanford people who remained there, and most of us remained there. But I'm going to join the dots in an interesting way here. In Ireland, in people who are in their 20s, are still emigrating like crazy. Even though we have a full employment here, people in their 20s and late 20s even are traveling to teach, do medicine, whatever else, both in the Middle East and Australia. A lot will come back, but it's interesting that these are the two places in the world that they go, because it's there's opportunity and they are welcome, and there's large expat communities that welcome them, and it fits well with both to head off that way.
It's exciting to have a long-term view that is oriented toward people and economy. So what does your father, your family, your generations, how do they take that? Are they excited as well as the youth?
I believe yes. I mean, change is not easy anywhere and everywhere. So there is like this shock of change initially, but I believe there's excitement. There's room for opportunities. Like you can speak with anyone right now and they say, okay, I want to do a startup and start a company. And like, it wouldn't be something that is not achievable. Like doing a unicorn is something that may happen with higher probability. If you spoke about that like 10, 15 years ago, it's like maybe go just work in a government job or do a private sector job that is more easier to do, and like there's no room for opportunity. So I think that the narrative has shifted and there is excitement from multiple generations, which is like a little bit surprising for me, but it is refreshing to see the excitement. Even like older people, 40, 50 years old and plus, they would go on and take advantage of those opportunities. If it's compared to our generation where it's like we were so lucky enough to be just starting at that opportunity.
And 50% of the population, that's a powerhouse. The capital to Saudi, where does the money come for your small startups, for your investments, is it international base of investment coming in? Or is it local? You guys absolutely have the resources.
I think it's a mixture of both. I have a belief that it still hasn't matured or studied in the right direction, and they're still figuring it out because we're in the early stages. But a bunch of it comes from locally, from either government incentives or even like private investors locally. Also, some of it is from foreign investment, and both in the startup and in the investor set. And it's like some startups choose to open up in Saudi, for example. They're based in Egypt, they're based in other countries, neighboring countries, and they would think about Saudi as the next market to expand and grow.
David, when we graduated, so many of us, I don't know what percentage went in startup. Obviously, Stanford was so exciting about Stanford startups, but many of us did the conservative consulting and investment banking. Your class, Khalid, is very different. How do you see that changing in the type of people that are coming to the London, that are of the Stanford, Harvard, and young people that you come across, David? Have you seen that change, that appetite, small startup versus?
If you're going to go to London, you're probably not going to do it with a startup, because the startup's not going to recruit you from Stanford to come to London to sponsor your visa. So you're less likely to get it. And also, the advantage of doing a startup in the States is you have just such a massive market as well. It's a fast-growing market, and it has the efficiencies of the capital, etc., as well. Yeah, but Khalid, if we go a little bit to the politics, but not really talk about it, but to the bit of, you're in the States, Catherine and I are not. I spend a lot of my time explaining to people why Trump is not mad. Well, he is mad, but he's not as crazy, because we think he's a joke. I mean, our national broadcasters in Ireland and England go like, "Oh, look at the crazy thing he's doing." You go like, "He's not crazy. Raising a tariff is actually he's raised a 10% value-added tax or an 8% value-added tax in the country. He's just raised more money for himself." So, but I'm not speaking defense of him, but he's not. But we don't take him seriously, but it's more to go. Has it really changed the business environment that people are looking at from Stanford? Because you never bet against the States. The States is so entrepreneurial. The people are so friendly, and having worked in many places across the States, the view from outside the world is like, oh, it's all people wearing red baseball caps. And they're like, no, it's not. And the people who even voted for Trump, we would still like them to speak to them because they're rational and they're reasons. Anyway, sorry, not good politics. tell us about the business environment, how people are feeling about what it means. The media circus we have at the minute, because he's very getting media circus attention.
So I agree with you in terms of like the US has the right institutions for it not to be hurt by short-term policies or short-term things. It's really well at its core. It has really good foundations. But I feel like this is a time of uncertainty. I feel like nobody knows what's happening even here. There is a lot of turbulence, uncertainty, how things will change. And we've seen it in the past few months, like a lot of changes happening like multiple times each week, which is, I've never seen it before. I don't know if it happened before, but there's a lot of uncertainty. People are trying to continue as is and like not trying to just not focus on the noise and focus on what they can do from business end. And I feel the rational thing for me is like to wait and see how it goes. Because you cannot like stop everything or change everything, and like you're not knowing with this uncertainty. So this is what I sense from the environment right here.
And that's why I think it's so interesting, and I'm being naive here with Saudi. If you guys have the natural resources to then diversify the economy, I wonder if you're somewhat harbored, protected.
I think it has more clarity. Yes, we have like the majority of our economy is dependent on oil, and like oil prices have been fluctuating right now. But overall, it's like where everybody has their minds at and where they want to head. And this for me makes more clarity, there's not as much uncertainty as I feel, and like it makes you do business with more confidence, even though if you're gonna make a mistake, like you can correct it later, but it's like at least you know where everything is set.
David, and I'm thinking about education now, kind of going back, and David had the honor to go to Cambridge and then Stanford, and the education there in our 1990s, late 80s. I wonder, in your imagination, David, what allowed us to use that education other than the name? I'm kind of thinking about the content of Stanford and what it taught us.
So, but I managed to get out of operations class, but I remember having discussions with people who did operations. And one of the exercises was, what would you outsource of business school? And essentially, because you'd outsource the janitorial services and the facilities management, even the teaching. And I think that where people got to was basically you keep the admissions department. Because essentially that's your quality control. And it's about the brand. Because Kath, what do you remember very much? I remember imposter syndrome, that's about it, from what you learned. So what we're doing 30 years later, our paths have been crazily different, but it's not about what you learn in school. It's it shows you lots of things, and you get to think about lots of different situations and a way to think through things, but there's not, unless you did finance and you bond duration or something, it's not about what you learn. Very, very rarely. It's just a great melting pot to be from.
What do you think, Khalid?
I heard a sentence recently from Alumni, I think, and like it makes you learn how to learn. How do you feel about that sentence and notion?
What do you think, David?
It teaches you to assimilate large amounts of information, trying to read a case study as quickly as possible, and try to get by with 20 minutes of work, depending on how your attitude is towards your study. But it puts your study is so different from college. You're in an environment where everyone wants to talk about business. Typically, you're talking about business and you're just learning. It's like, Khalid, we're just naturally interested to learn about what's happening in Saudi Arabia, and you're interested to learn from us. So it's just it's self-selecting melting pot of those who want to just learn and put bits together, and you're constantly turning things around a little bit. So I think it's a mixture of environment. The professors are challenging you as well and making you think differently. So I think it's a mixture of things. Again, it's an environment that you get put into, and partly because it's. I think it also helps that it's not particularly non-evaluative. You're not going to fail, and your life is not going to be changed by being an RJ scholar necessarily. So it's just I think it's a very safe environment to do that in.
And David, one of the things, and back to Khalid on that, even the inhalation of cases as fast as possible. Now, you guys use AI. You're encouraged to use AI, which I think is fantastic. My understanding. So, how does AI turn up in education over the last 2 years at Stanford?
One of the fascinating things is I came here not knowing like AI would play a factor. And right on the first, like middle of the first quarter, or I think it was the first quarter, I had optimization and simulation modeling. Like the professor went in and said, please use AI and tell me how it reacts to those situations. And just let's do a Google sheet and like see how the reactions, let's learn from each other about it. And I was struck like, wow, I didn't expect that to happen so soon. So going back like to the last 2 years, I think it plays an essential part. Learning about it, I think, is one of the most valuable skills that I have learned at Stanford because I think it's going to reshape the future of work, the future of everything. So knowing how to deal with it, speak the language, it's like the language of coding, but we're in a new era, which is AI. So if you know that language, if you have a head start, know how to deal with it, know how to use it efficiently, it is really good. And I think across most classes, not all of them allow AI, but most of them, I think has additive value, a different level of conversation, a different level of thinking about things. And I cannot remember a class that we didn't bring up AI in it, even if it's a politics class like a US-China class or whatever, there's AI as an important element.
Do you see the quality of the conversation in the classroom? So you've crunched the cases with AI. My hope is that that gives you more space to reflect and come up with new ideas. Is that so?
I have the same hope, and I have my approach to it is in a similar fashion. It's trying to not use AI as the brain, but use it as a tool rather to structure and better, like another person that's gonna give you counter arguments, that gonna give you a different flow, give you more structure, and like you can think more about things. So the way I look at it is it's better to have discussions with the AI itself and the language model rather than just dumping everything and saying, give me the answers.
I love dumping. That's a great verb. How's it showing up now in the work you're doing, David?
I think I mentioned before, we have the team that's trying to build the chatbot that gives the perfect answers. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, and I'm going, let's just keep a human in the loop and it'll work much better for us.
We still need elders to remind them there's wisdom to be had.
But you have much more of a chance. So even just some simple tactical questions, are you guys still using Chat GPT, or are there different tools you'd use for different aspects of?
I think we learned like to know that there are differences even time-wise. For example, certain periods you'd find ChatGPT really good at some aspects, but like 2 months later you find Claude surpassing it in this specific aspect. Another point is different LLMs are good at different things. For example, you use a certain LLM just like to refine writing, and you use another LLM just to do research, another LLM just to like focus on analyzing data. So it's more of trying to work with the ecosystem as a whole rather than just focusing on one. I don't think you get the most value out of it.
David, when we came out of Stanford, we were still having debates about how we were going to use this thing. So we weren't at the same maturity that you guys are with AI, even though it's nascent. But is the internet, the Google, the way we search information, does that become defunct or changed?
Well, there's two angles in that. One is, I can't remember, remember it's called propensity. The one that tells you here's the source is a very valuable search tool to do that. So, definitely Google's threatened by that. It's very useful to have the synthesis rather than have to go into 40 pages to find something. However, I will caution, Lisa, my wife, does commercial due diligence. And, she uses the old school technique of speaking to people. And she does marketplace interviewing people, and you get so much more insight from speaking to people than just Googling it. It's like, oh, I can't find it on the internet, therefore it's not there. It goes back to doing your business research on ideas. You learn so much more by actually engaging and speaking with people than I've researched it and found the answer on the internet and what other people have said. I will caution to that side of, yes, if you think about it, because I do, because I was a consulting after business school. There was very little databases of information were proprietary. Now we've got so much more information at our fingertips that Google did that. Now AI is a layer on top of that to help us synthesize it, but we still have to match it to something. And does the LLM model come with the knowledge, or what your knowledge, or if I were to use LLM to research things in Saudi Arabia and the culture there, it would tell me stuff, but I think you would very quickly go like, well, David, it says that. How to prepare for a business meeting in Saudi, and I go like, yeah, I get some good insight, but you go like, yes, wow, say that, but you're missing some of the nuance and the lived experience of that. So I think that's, I see AI as, it's another iteration that is helping us synthesize all this information, but there's still a lot of perspective to bring.
Synthesize is a great word, Khalid. In your economy, there's synthesis and creation. How do you go from synthesis to creativity?
Yeah, I think this is an important part. I don't know exactly how that's going to happen, but I feel like originality is something important. It's good to pick up things from where people left off, but it's not always the right way. Sometimes because of necessity of time, necessity of things at that time, they were designed this way. But you have to think them through rather than just dive into implementation. So this is how I hope things go, and I feel I have good hope and good outlook that this is the way we're trying to go, is mixing between both of learning from other people and pick where they left off, plus bringing originality to ideas.
Just having that context, Colin, gives me great hope that you're asking that question. The creativity. David, we had these little classes called creativity or something. I can't even remember what it was called, but there was very little emphasis based on getting out there, talking to people, getting exposed to the poets and the homemakers and the engineers, philosophers, etc. So I have hope. I don't know. What do you think about creativity in the business world?
I'm a little bit more for the ops side, but I'm a big believer innovation is often bringing together two existing ideas and linking them. It's rarely something completely original. But, for goodness sake, if you go to Steve Jobs, the iPad, suddenly took the computer out of if I go to AgTech, took the computer out of having to be in the home. Suddenly the iPad could go out on the farm. It's these things just bring change to the world in a way that we don't necessarily see. So originality is an interesting word. It's just that bringing together different ideas, works well.
How do you see that play in terms of the philosophy built of Saudi? And does that still show through in the growth that you guys are going to?
I think it's important to connect to the history. I think you have many lessons, you have many fascinating things to learn from them, or even just to see them and make you think on it on a different level. I think it's important. This is why some of the places in Saudi are valued because of their historical and heritage value. For example, you can look at Al Ula, which is in Saudi, which is 3,000-year plus place. It's being preserved for that. It's being visited and created as a tourist attraction for a purpose, that is to see how things were, to preserve them, to try and learn more about. There are a lot of discoveries that have happened in the previous years from these ages, and they're trying to discover more. And even if we're going to the modern history and the Riyadh, which is 300-year start of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia place, or the original capital of Saudi Arabia, it's still being preserved and taught how things were back then, what are the influences, why things were. And so I think connecting those pieces with today is essential, because I am a true believer that modernity, urban cities shouldn't be the same, shouldn't take a template of it. Originality, heritage is important to keep there, and mixing it with the modern era is important.
So let me throw in a brain teaser. This is on my mind today, because we're talking about innovation. And you think about innovation, and then I think about Skype is shut down today.
Oh.
And I'm going, was what used to be, why wasn't it WhatsApp and Zoom put together? Because it provided all those things. So what about it that, why did Skype not become the Is it the fact that it didn't do text messaging very well? Because WhatsApp became the international way of communicating for people overseas. It destroyed telecoms texting revenues. It should have been Zoom, but it didn't. But it had it all. It had the perfect, so I mean, it was innovative, but it didn't take off. So I just use that as an example of the innovation of WhatsApp and the innovation of Zoom was already there. So there's something in it that they somehow managed to do it. Maybe just the tech stack was wrong for Skype.
There's not many people that can do that integrated thinking. And I'm fascinated by that. I could talk to you guys for hours. But what are you most excited about at this present time about wrapping up Stanford and going to your home?
I'm going to learn, I'm going to continue to grow. But what I'm most excited about is just to make an impact on two levels. One is just to improve things in Saudi that I can improve in my major or in my industry, and also expand globally. Another thing is try and enable young talent also in Saudi. This is a passion of mine, and I have been an MBA ambassador during my time here. I have been MENA Club co-president, and these things really bring energy to me, and hopefully I can do that. And maybe whether it's like getting people into Stanford from my home country, or just like trying to improve talents there and being a sort of a mentor or leader there is exciting to me.
Oh, geez. I don't know if I was that legacy oriented when I left. I really am so inspired. Khalid, where would you, David, you finish up.
Catherine, I've got to share and I've got to advocate. I interview for Stanford undergrad. I did the alumni interviews because there's very few people who go to Stanford and then return to Ireland. They have a sense they generally stay in the States. But it's such a privilege because I've spoken to virtually all the applicants over the last 10, 15 years. And they're great kids. And, most of them have no chance of getting in. I mean, it's a 4% accept rate. But it's just so uplifting that what they want to do. And it goes to, the interview you have with Peter. It's just like, you can also just do a lot of good by A, sharing a little bit about Stanford, but B, just giving a bit of a boost because they're all great people and just tell them they're great people. And for them to hear that from someone is just great. So I do some of the, obviously, Khalid, you're going to do it for the GSB, but think about doing it for the undergrad as well, because there may not be that many others around, but it is very rewarding in terms of those short conversations with them both ways.
Listening to Khalid and reflecting over 30 years, how would we have changed when we graduated? Was there something in our philosophy or that you would have liked to make, or as you started out 30 years ago?
The observation, because I remember, when I can't remember, whatever advisory board came to visit, they were all 30 plus years alum. And you went, how on earth did they end up where they were? Because they took all these paths and they weren't, 30 years at Goldman or 30 years at Bain. They'd done this and then done this and then done this in telecom and done this here. And you go like, how does that happen? And then you discover, 30 years later, everyone's done. And so it's kind of, and realizing also to avoid the little bit of envy, because not everyone can be the Steve Jurvetson or Jeff School of the Year. It's just kind of, there'll be some people who'll be breakout, they'll do whatever, and that'll be great. And it's, but it's there's just lots of good people doing lots of good stuff. And,
Awesome.
There's no set path through it. There's no, people feel, I've got to do, after 2 years, I've got to be this level, or starting this. And it's like, no, we all move through a different path, and we're just constantly building and gathering moss as we roll along. So,
amen to that.
Thank you for joining us. For more insights and information, visit my website at katherinemclennan.com. That's spelled KATHARINEMCLENNAN.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the series so you know when the next episode will be, as we continue exchanging wisdom, connecting past, present, and future through the perspectives of Stanford MBA graduates of 1995 and 2025.